All right, guys, welcome back. And what is going on with the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran? And how is it impacting the real estate market? That's what we're going to get into today. At the moment, my head is spinning. So I recorded this episode about a week ago, and I was about to publish it. And then in the last 24 hours, the Iranian government announced that the Straits of Hormuz were fully open. But unfortunately, Donald Trump could not help himself and had to go and do a whole load of social media posts on his Truth Social and saying things like that they were going to give the uranium back to America and that there was going to be no payment involved, no reparations, basically pushing back on all of the narrative coming from Iran. And so as of today, the Iranian government has just announced that the Straits of Hormuz are closed again and that there have been reports of attacks on ships that had been trying to go through. So the whole thing is back up in the air. Very, very volatile situation. And no doubt it'll shift again as soon as this episode has aired. But I think it's important to go and post what I talked about, because whether or not the straits are open or whether it's closed, the damage has been done to a degree. The oil has been cut off for the past, 45 days or something like that. And in addition to that, there has been damage done to the gas infrastructure that Qatar have. And so they're talking about there being a repair cycle of something like 5 years. So this is going to impact the housing market and the wider property market because of interest rates and cost inflation and everything like that. So let's get into that. This episode is brought to you by my very own Elite Property Accelerator. If scaling an investment portfolio is something that you're trying to do, then click on the Learn More link in the show notes, and it should tell you a little bit about how the program works. All right, let's get on with the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode, and this is the first episode since January. The podcast has been on a bit of hiatus since then, and a lot has happened since then, so we're going to get into it today. Last episode was, I think, episode 271 with James Askew, James from the UK, and then shortly after that, I went on a little trip to Dubai, and suddenly everything has changed since then. So what I'm going to talk about today is a market crash coming? That is the topic. And there's a lot to kind of get into here. And so what I want to do is I want to just explain, first of all, if I turn back the clock to January, I took the family away on a little family vacation. And it was my wife's birthday. And so we booked a holiday in Dubai. And we flew out there for about 10 days of sunshine, lovely time of the year to do it. And we were staying in this incredible hotel called the Fairmont on the Palm. It's this beautiful big hotel in Dubai. And funny enough, another Irish guy staying in the hotel, quite well known, a guy called Rob Lipsett, and a fitness guy, has a big YouTube following. He was staying in the hotel as well. And so we were having dinner one night, and there he is sitting at the next table. So we were staying in a room called the City View room. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because a couple of weeks later, our room would have been ground central for the Iranian drone attack, the very first one that hit the night of the not the invasion, but the night that the US and Israel started bombing Iran. Iran retaliated with these drones and ballistic missiles. And the very first impact in Dubai was our hotel, and directly above the car park where our room looked out. We had a room that had what's known as a city view, and I think that's a euphemism for sorry, buddy, you didn't get a sea view, and so they're a little bit cheaper. But when I saw the videos of the hotel getting hit by the drone, it was exactly where our room was situated. So thankfully, we had gone back home. I think about 2 weeks before these attacks started happening. But incidentally, when I was there, we were on the beach and I was scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or something like that. And there was a journalist that I follow, and he came out and said that all flights from KLM and Air France to Dubai had been stopped.
What do the airlines know about Iran that we don't? Because several European carriers are cutting flights to the Middle East, including KLM, Air France and Lufthansa.
And that was a bit worrying. I can remember saying to my wife, what do you think of this? And at the time I was thinking, is this like a prelude to war? Do they know something? Should we actually be preparing to check out of the hotel and go straight to the airport? And the funny thing is we were only on day 4 or something like that of the holiday. So we still had 6 more days to go. And I was like, do we really want to, if we're overreacting here, maybe? Anyway, we get back home after our holiday, and I'm in the gym one morning, Saturday morning, and I see on the news that Israel has commenced bombing of Iran. And then about a half an hour later, the US confirmed it had done it as well. And so just incredible to think that the hotel I was staying in was targeted. And I think it was primarily targeted because the Fairmont is a US brand. And so they targeted the hotel. Anyway, fast forward to today. And Trump announced that there is a 2-week ceasefire. He just announced it yesterday, I think it is. And so, all of a sudden the markets have responded very positively. Everyone is thinking, this is great. Finally, things are going to get back to normal. I think everyone is, I don't know what they're smoking, but I do not believe that things are going to go back to normal. And I say that, I'm not a pessimist, but I just think that there are too many things that are going to get in the way of this ceasefire holding. Number one, what's the first thing that all the journalists around the world are saying as soon as Trump announced the ceasefire? They put out this word that Trump has been humiliated, that Trump has tacoed, and Trump has done this, Trump has backed off completely, that the Iranians are getting exactly what they wanted in their 10-point plan or whatever. And that the kind of man that Donald Trump is, the narcissist that he is, and the thin skin that he has, I think it is highly unlikely that he is going to allow that to stand. The fact that everyone's calling him the humiliated party, I don't think he's going to allow that to stand. So I think that's the first thing that he's really unhappy about. But second of all, the US are not the only ones in this war. Israel are part of this, and Israel have a completely different agenda to the US. And I don't think Israel are happy about this ceasefire whatsoever. And they have every intention to continue to bombard Lebanon. And that is causing friction. And Iran are saying that the bombing has to stop everywhere for us to uphold the ceasefire. So I think it just has me thinking that we are in a very, very different world now than we were even 6 months ago. And the reason I mention that, this could be the beginning of some sort of a crash, why do I say that? I say that because investors do not like uncertainty. And there is so much uncertainty now out there. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So why is it, if investors don't like uncertainty, and why is it, if we're in such an unstable world and everything like that, why are the markets continuing to rise? Why are people still investing? Why is all this kind of happening as if there isn't really a major problem? And one of the reasons that happens is because people can be slow to accept. There is a thing that I teach my clients in the accelerator and around cognitive bias. And there's a thing called continuity bias. And continuity bias is this belief that the system that is currently in place will continue, will maintain. And when that is the case, you run the risk of overlooking threats, and you're less cautious than perhaps you should be. And so that's the first thing I would say. And one thing I'll kind of turn the clock back and talk about as well is I think maybe a year ago or maybe a year and a half ago, I posted an episode, and it was called the 18-year cycle, market cycle or property cycle. And I can remember when I first heard this concept, I kind of thought, what a ridiculous idea. Like, how is it that, all of these things could converge and there would happen to be an 18-year specific trough to peak kind of cycle. But as it happens, I've gone and I've looked at the numbers, and I did this for that episode about a year and a half ago, and it said to me that 2026 will be the year of the beginning of a new cycle, and the new cycle begins with a crash or some sort of a downturn, and 2026. If you go back from 2026 backwards, the date before that is 2008, and you kind of think to yourself, okay, there's a fairly obvious sort of red flag. But then in addition to that, you go back prior to that another 18 years, and it brings you back to 1992, I think it is. And 1992 or 1990, I can't remember exactly the dates if you work back from it, but that is around about 1990. That's the time of the currency crisis, when the Bank of England collapsed or something like that, or the Barings Bank collapse. And then in the 1990s, there was a huge crash as well. So these cycles are actually kind of, you can see them there. And anyway, I've been thinking about this 18-year cycle, and I kind of think to myself, there is actually an element of truth, or certainly it does seem to be valid when you look at the systems that are there. So let's have a look at what are the two forces that are shaping the market right now. And there's two sides to it. There's the risks and the threats on one side, and then there are the positives and with the counterbalance, we'll say, on the other side. So the risks we have are geopolitical risk. We have rates. The interest rates that the banks are charging is a risk. We have a big risk around debt, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then we have what I'm calling fragmentation. And the fragmentation is around political fragmentation and the Western alliance, the fragmentation of NATO and all of that. A lot of this stuff is starting to come together and create risks. And if we look at the geopolitical risk, you've got Iran, currently the conflict there. You've got Russia and Ukraine, conflict there. And you also have the US, China. There's this kind of nearly a Cold War going on between the two of them, where there's this arms race going on. And it's not necessarily a weapons arms race. It is an AI arms race. And China and the US are both rushing as quickly as they can for AI dominance. And there is a thing called superintelligence that people are working towards. And the idea is that once superintelligence is achieved, it's a little bit like the nuclear bomb. It is so powerful that it can basically take control of another country's defense systems. It can shut down an entire country, all of this kind of stuff. And the first person to reach that has that power. The other person that isn't quite there yet, they may as well be 600 years behind, because the speed that superintelligence can move at is so much faster than anything that a human can deal with. So there's a lot of risks there. And the problem is that when you're in an arms race between the US and China, the big risk is that these guys, it's all about speed. Who gets there first? And if speed is the priority, then safety checks and all of these kind of AI safety rules that are in place are being put to the side. And it's like, listen, that's not important. Speed to superintelligence is the primary goal. Now, all of this stuff that has happened, and also don't forget we've got the US, talking about getting Greenland, and that's a major upset of the Western alliance. Iran has led to massive spike in shipping insurance. The Straits of Hormuz that we have all heard about now at this stage controls 20% of the world's oil and gas. Oil is being shipped around the world from the Straits of Hormuz. A lot of that oil comes to Ireland, comes to the UK, comes to Europe, and those ships are only now arriving into the docks here in Ireland and in the UK and stuff. And those are the last ships that are going to be arriving from the Straits of Hormuz for a while. And so that being the case, we are now going to be in a moment where the gas and oil reserves that we keep in this country are possibly going to start to fall. And that is a major risk. We also have, as a byproduct of oil and gas, you've got fertilizer, which obviously is required for food security. Then you've got another byproduct of gas is helium. And helium is used to cool data centers. So this is not just simply oil and gas and the cost of filling your car going up. This has this very, very large effect. And what it's going to do is it will push up prices of almost everything. So food's going to go up, fuel is going to go up, filling, the tank to, in your car or heating your house, all of that's going to go up. But there's going to be the additional sort of secondary effects of construction materials are going to go up. Transport is going up. So the transport of all goods from China or whatever, that is actually going to get more expensive as well. So there's a whole lot of stuff. And what that does is that pushes up the cost of living. The cost of living pushes up inflation. Inflation goes up, and the way central banks respond is to increase rates. Interest rates will likely start to go up now. So we have rates going up higher for longer. That is definitely not good for any kind of investment market. Markets love low interest costs because it means that you can borrow lots of money, it doesn't cost you much, and you can put the money into stocks and shares and property and everything. Whenever the rates go up, usually the corresponding effect is that investments go down. So I think there is a chance that property prices will fall as a result of an increase in interest rates. And we saw it 2021, interest rates were on the floor because of COVID. And then we started to see the inflation spike. And how did the central banks respond? They pushed up interest rates. And all of a sudden, when the interest rates went up, the property prices fell. We've seen that in the UK. The UK is probably the biggest example because it's such a small country compared to the EU or the US that it is being it's being over impacted by this. And we talk about debt. Debt is government debt. Obviously, there is huge government debt in all of the different countries post-COVID. The amount of money that was pumped into supporting the systems and all that, all governments are carrying a huge amount of debt. Then in addition to that, the US debt is absolutely astronomical. It's something like 44 trillion or whatever it is. I mean, it's completely unsustainable. And it means that the interest rate alone is greater now than their annual military spend. That's just servicing the, that's not repaying the debt, that's just servicing the debt. So this is a major issue around the world. And then you've also got the private credit market. That is a big issue. After the 2008 crash, a lot of the big banks around the world, they stopped lending so recklessly because they were now under a lot more regulation. And the private equity funds, they kind of stepped in. And so a lot of money has been lent from those guys to the private credit market. And so there's talk about there being as much as 3 trillion of private credit out there. And it's a little bit like 2008. There is a black hole as to where is all this debt? Is it in secure investments or is it in weak investments? What are the incentives for the people that made these investments? Are they, were they likely to actually be sensible and prudent in the way they lent this money? There's also a huge amount of debt that's accumulating from AI overinvestment. Everyone has been on this kind of AI bandwagon for the last while, and they've all been putting a lot of investment into AI stocks and all this like OpenAI and stuff. And now suddenly people are starting to realize, hold on, this is a little bit like the dot-com crash of 2000. Suddenly people are saying, this is going to take a lot longer to get our payback than we thought. And so they're repricing their risks and their assets and stuff. And suddenly it looks like, whoa, we've way spent too much. We have not got value for this. And so a lot of people are now pulling back from that. Then you've also got the data center build out. So there's huge amounts of data centers being built around the world. They're spending trillions on this. And there is power stations that are having to be put together for all of this as well. The biggest problem with all of that is that the money that goes into data centers, the billions that's been invested, this is not long-term investment, because unlike a power grid or something like that, or a railway grid, all of the railway tracks that were laid down in the 18th century, they're still around today. Power stations that were built 50 years ago are still generating power today. But a data center is built on chips and servers that only really have an effective life of about 5 years, after which they have to be upgraded. And that's a huge expensive upgrade. So can these companies recover their money in 5 years? Big question there. And so that is one of the big risks, I think. And in the next couple of years, that's going to come home to roost potentially. And then I mentioned fragmentation. So one of the biggest issues we have is that we are not all pulling together as a society anymore. It used to be that the West, as we would call it, was the US, Europe, everyone kind of working together against the East, against China and Russia. That is fragmenting very, very quickly. Donald Trump is so anti-NATO that it looks like they might pull out of NATO. If that was to happen, then it's hard to sort of imagine what Russia could do if they decide that, do you know what, we want to get the Baltic nations back under our control. We want Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia to be, like a former Soviet republic. My wife and kids are currently away in Moldova. That is another place that used to be in the Soviet Union. And Vladimir Putin in Russia has expressed kind of desires to, expand the empire again. And if NATO was fragmented, it's quite possible that there wouldn't be anyone there to stand up to Vladimir Putin. So there's a lot of risk there. But then you see the way Donald Trump has treated his allies, Europe and the UK, everyone, they're all being treated like they're enemies. He's lobbing tariffs on everybody. All of this stuff is fragmenting these alliances that have stood for years and years. Like since the World War II, we've had these alliances in place protecting and holding the peace. And he's come along and he's shaked the whole thing up. And it's very, very dangerous time I think we're living in. And then the worst thing about it is if there is some sort of a major crash akin to 2008, back in 2008, we had Barack Obama and we had the ECB, all these guys working together to try to stabilize the uncertainty in the market. Guys were, pulling together, trying to kind of make all of this stuff work. Donald Trump does not think like that. Donald Trump will be thinking, no, we're only doing what suits us. The rest of you can all go to hell. And so I don't see us being in a situation where if there was some sort of a major debt crisis, that Donald Trump would be helping Europe to solve it or, doing anything that would help anyone else other than himself. So all of these risks, when you take these, and then the final one, by the way, before I forget, is you also have this ticking time bomb that is AI rollout. And what are the jobs that are going to be lost from AI coming on stream? We have so much AI power now. Like we all have ChatGPT and we have Claude and we have these different AI apps. They are incredibly powerful and they're only getting more and more powerful every single year. Now, it might be slower than we were expecting, but at some point, huge numbers of jobs are going to be lost because of AI. And that again is another risk to society. So taken on their own, like geopolitical risk, that's a big risk. On its own, we can manage. The rates, going up, That's a major risk for the market, but on its own, it's okay. We can probably manage. This whole debt crisis that's out there potentially hovering around, like that could be a major problem, but on its own, it can probably be managed. And then the fragmentation issue that we have, that's a major political risk as well, but it can probably be managed. But when you have them all happening around the same time, potentially crossing over into one another, that is a major problem that we would not be able to control, and we would not be able to keep under control. So this is the big risk. This is what the uncertainty out there that I'm concerned about. Then let's look at the counterbalance. And the counterbalance is all the positives that are kind of supporting the market and why it still seems to be a good market up there. First of all, supply shortage. So the first thing that we do inside of the accelerator is we have a look at what's going on with supply. Is there a huge bump in supply about to come to the market that could force prices down for you? Here in Ireland anyway, and the UK seems to be in the same position, there is absolutely no way you can build enough housing units to satisfy demand. And so if you were to at the moment we're doing 30,000 houses a year. We need to be doing 80,000 houses a year, like 50,000 more than we're currently doing. There is just no chance we can do that. And so we're in a situation like that. To use as a contrast, Dubai, where I was in January, they did something like 30,000 units last year, maybe 40,000. And this year in 2026, this is the year that something like 120,000 are supposed to be delivered. And it was because the market was on fire. Everyone was like moving to Dubai, buying in Dubai, investing in Dubai. Everything was all gung-ho for Dubai. Now, after this Iranian conflict, all of a sudden, all of these units coming to the market at the same time. At the same time, everyone is nervous now of investing in that market. So there will be zero demand. Very different in a place that has 90% immigrants to the population of only 10%. In Ireland, we don't have that. We have people that are living here in Ireland. They were born here in Ireland. They identify as Irish. You don't identify as being from Dubai if you live in Dubai. You're still an Irish person living in Dubai, an English person living in Dubai. And so people will continue to be capable of getting on a plane, going somewhere else if there's jets, ballistic missiles flying overhead, whatever, drones. So that is another issue. Short supply. Ireland, England, most of Europe just cannot supply enough housing because in Ireland, certainly, planning rules. The planning system is very, very problematic. It's very, very slow. It's very, very difficult to go and get something built. Labour. We just do not have enough labour to build what we need to build. A lot of the people that were building all of the units back in 2007, we did 85,000 housing units in 2007. Here we are 18 years later and we're only doing 30,000. And yet we have a population that is 1 million people more today than we did back then. So it just makes no sense. It's because our labour market was completely decimated by the crash. A lot of people moved abroad. A lot of people relocated to Australia, Canada, wherever it is, and they created lives there and they're not coming back. A lot of people that didn't move abroad trained themselves. They were working on a construction site, they went back to university and they learned how to become an engineer or something. And so they are no longer labour, they are now professionals. So all of this has meant that the labour supply is really, really constrained. And then in addition to that, if we want to increase our labour, we have to bring it in from outside. So we have to get migrants to come in that are skilled labour, and those guys come in. Where do they live? There isn't enough housing for those guys to come in. So we're in this really difficult position. And then the build process does take time. It's like 18 months probably to build a house or something like that. Then you've got the demographics. Now I mentioned the population there. In 2006, the census in Ireland was done and it was a 4.4 million population. Today, the Irish population is at 5.3, heading for 5.4. So 1 million people in 18 years. We have not been building enough houses to accommodate 1 million people. And so that is where the shortage is. It's a structural shortage. We cannot build enough to supply the amount of people that are being born and that are moving to this country. All of this is causing pressure to be on houses. And if you're not able to build them fast enough, but the demand is there, it's just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. Now, on top of that, government policy, because rents have gone up so much, people are complaining. House prices have gone up, people are complaining. So the government intervenes. And as you know, they obviously mean well when they decide to kind of like control growth or control rents or whatever. But what it does is those well-meant policy changes, they can introduce all sorts of issues. You end up with rent controls in place. What does that do? That means that landlords are now pulling out of the market. And when they announced this 6-year rule that came into force in March last month, that pushed thousands and thousands of landlords out of the market. And when people move out, it means there's less property to rent. And if there's less property to rent, what does it do? It pushes up demand for rental. And so all of this is this vicious cycle that's causing pressure to be on the system. And so it's supporting the sales market and the rental market. Now, you've also got a lot of infrastructure and energy upgrades going on. We're transitioning to a renewable sort of energy. We're trying to wean ourselves off gas. And so there's all this investment going into infrastructure. And what's happening is all of these things, they spill over into land values and they push up land values. So assets, I think, potentially have been mispriced because you've got all of the counterbalance and you got all the risks. And it's hard to kind of figure out, like, where do these things, where do they balance out? Where do they eventually achieve some sort of balance? What I've seen is, going back to the Dubai example, I see people over there who went and invested in Dubai. They were very, very gung-ho and bullish about Dubai, and I can't blame them. I love visiting Dubai. It was a great atmosphere back in January, and I felt this energy in the place. And then today, though, you can see the streets are empty. Any social media that I see, there's not a lot of people out on the streets. And I think what's going to happen there is, first of all the high-rise towers that people used to love doing videos from because of the amazing views, those high-rise towers for the last month have been targets for drone attacks. And so people, what have they done? They've moved out of their towers and they've moved into low-lying villas. So at least the people that own the villas, they've had people moving in. So there has been a positive move from towers to villas. So if you own a villa, you're in good shape. But most people were buying apartments. So the high-rise towers are now emptying out. Funny enough, I was just speaking with a client of mine today who, when he joined my accelerator, he was based in Dubai, and now he's going back there next month, literally to close out his lease. He's moving out of Dubai, and he sees this as notwithstanding the 2-week ceasefire, he doesn't think that it's stable enough for him to consider staying there. And there's going to be a lot of people in Dubai that will be saying, oh no, the market's going to bounce back and all that. I think it'll take a while for confidence to return. It will return, but it'll take a while. And in the meantime, you're going to have apartment buildings that are these high-rise that they will not be able to rent them for a period of time. And if that happens, there'll be a lot of people that are struggling now to make payments on bank loans and things like that. So you can see how there are some markets that are going to be, deeply affected by this situation. There are other markets like Ireland where we're a neutral country. We don't have a huge amount of worry about geopolitical risk in that sense. So we're a little bit more insulated by that. So demand is strong. Supply is structurally constrained. This creates scarcity, and scarcity is what you're looking for when you're an investor. So that's good. In terms of what I would do as an investor, if I wanted to win or to kind of play to the strength of this as an opportunity, I would say that who wins? Number one, those people who control supply. So I think developers are going to win. in this situation, notwithstanding the time it takes for planning to be achieved and stuff. But developers should do well, because prices are just going to continue to be under pressure from supply demand imbalance. People who are able to convert a piece of land into a land with planning will probably do quite well, because there's always going to be a need for more construction, more shovel-ready sites. And so we will call it just planning gain. If you're able to convert a property, or if you're able to add value to it just by getting a different planning permission on it, that's probably going to be quite good for you as well. So conversion specialists, people who buy, let's say, an office building and convert it into apartments, they'll probably do quite well. People who solve the housing demand problem. So affordable housing, that's one of the things. There is a huge demand for affordable housing from the government, the local authorities, and the AHBs, the affordable housing bodies. And one of my clients is working in that sector, and he's been doing very well as a result of it, although he has seen some of the challenges from dealing with the guys. Flexible living, high density, urban, delivering apartment buildings into urban centres, that's going to do quite well. And there is a demand from big investors for those kind of blocks. And then those people who structure capital in an intelligent manner, those are going to do quite well. And what I mean is not to be over leveraged. If you're over leveraged, you're going to run into difficulty when the interest rates rise. If you have access to multiple funding sources, you'll do well. Not just relying on one, because one could be constrained, but to have multiple sources. So if you have a good reputation, you should be able to do quite well as a result of that. And then the ability to move quickly, to adapt quickly, I think that's very important. So we need to look at that. So I would say overall, my sentiment is that the system currently looks quite fragile. We need to be careful, but at the same time, it has been held together by scarcity. And so have a think about that. How do we exploit scarcity? That is one of the keys to survival. How do we survive the higher interest rates when they come on? That's how you're going to survive this cycle, we'll say. And then remaining flexible, because there could be shocks to the system. By the way, if you'd like to know more about my accelerator, the accelerator is, we're just launching another intake. We've had a couple of new members join, but there's still some seats left. So if you're interested, I'm going to put a link down in the description below, or the show notes, and it'll just say learn more. Click on that and it'll take you through the details. Now, to finish out today's podcast, and I'm glad to be back as of today's my sister's birthday. So say happy birthday to my sister, Aoife. So we're in a third of the way through April, and I don't think that this is a market where people that buy can hope to get lucky anymore. I think you do have to be deliberate and intentional. I'm not saying, like, if there is going to be a downturn coming, is that a reason to get out of investment in property? I don't think so. I think the next couple of years could actually be huge opportunity for people that are opportunistic. And some of the best deals, like the people that made the most money, are the guys that bought during these kind of downturns, because you can find mispriced assets. You can find distressed sellers that have to get out. And you can actually find some really good deals in that. But you do have to be deliberate and intentional. And the only way you're going to do that is to actually know what you're doing. So to bring this back to the start, I believe that 2026 is the beginning of a new cycle. I think that the 18-year cycle has begun again. We are in year one of a new 18-year cycle. And that year one usually means that we are in the beginning of a crash or some sort of a downturn. I don't think it's going to be business as usual. I don't think Ireland is necessarily going to see a crash of housing prices, but I do think that it is not going to be business as usual. I think it's going to be guys who know what they're doing will still do okay, but people who are kind of like, just dabbling in the market, I think they could get hurt by this. Usually an 18-year cycle, it works that there's a 4-year downturn period. So that brings us to 2029. And then there is a 7-year period of growth. And that is from 2030 to 2036. And then they say that there's 7 further years of what they call bubble territory. And that is when asset prices start to kind of get a little bit expensive and get more and more and more and more. And you get to the point where the thing has to crash. So thankfully, I'll be in my early 70s by that time. And so there's a scary thought. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. It's great to be back. If you have any comments or thoughts or questions, or you want me to cover a topic or anything like that, please do message me. You can either do it on social media, or you can send me an email, or use the links in the show notes, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.